ICQ Podcast, episode 395, Workshop Experiments. Well, hello and welcome, fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, to our 395th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported this episode by Martin Malley, Whiskey 0 Zulu Zulu Kilo, and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Dan Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Edmund DD5 Lima Papa to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Colin M6BRY rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is looking at workshop experiments. Well, we keep stressing every episode, it's your very kind generosity and donations that keep your ICQ podcast show on the air, paying its way, etc. And the greatest way of doing that is to show your value for the show by, donating very kindly to us. And that's exactly what Martin Malley did, and that's Whiskey 0 Zulu Zulu Kilo. And he said he appreciates the wide range of topics covered by the podcast, as well as how well the team works together on the news segments and the interesting deep dive features. Keep up the good operational and technical information coming his way. So, of course, we'll do that for you, Martin. And as I say, it's a pleasure to provide the show to you, and many, many, many thanks for your very kind donation. So Martin's donation, along with those monthly and annual subscription donors, they help pay our way and keep us, doing what we do. If you find value in our show today, we ask you to do a very simple thing. Just go to icqpodcast.com/donate and basically turn that value you received into a financial figure, and then select one of the options to send that our way. And as I say, we appreciate everything that you guys do for us. Right, well, now we need to go and create that value that we are hoping you're going to send our way by joining Martin, Dan, Edmund, and Ed as they discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including self-soldering PCBs and resources hit for the grid hunters. As always, hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
Well, hi guys, welcome to this episode's ICQ podcast, episode 395, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Hey there, Martin. Glad to join you tonight.
Yeah, great. And you're our only person in the States tonight because Karen couldn't make it, but will be back with us the next time. So glad to have you on board.
Well, I'll try to represent the U.S. properly.
Yeah. I'm sure you will, Dan. Moving to Germany, we have Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, good evening, everybody.
And in the UK, we have Mr. Edmund Spicer, M1MRB. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, so just the four of us tonight, but I'm sure we'll keep you amused with some of these things that are happening. Now, our first news story talks about PCBs and self-soldering PCBs. And I picked it, Frank sent me this one, but there's a gentleman who's designed a printed circuit board for doing surface mount components that's got a built-in heater, so it melts the solder for you when you're doing it. I think this is an interesting device. Dan, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, Hackaday comes up with these kind of things regularly, and it is pretty amusing. The current version does have some limitations, but hey, it could be kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, I think when people in our hobby build things, as we often do, yeah, you're right. I think this is something that we wouldn't necessarily have, the heating ovens and all those sort of things to do. But if you can self-heat the board yourself, that's a good one. Ed, you build things as well. What's your thoughts?
Oh, not to this level of complexity, I don't. Yeah, I'm just thinking it through and thinking, okay, self-heating PCB board, obviously only single-sided because otherwise everything would fall off the bottom when you turned it around. It's got to be, as you say, it's not something a hobbyist would use, I don't think, because you'd have to have all the components placed in the right place. Yeah, I suppose you could use it as a hobbyist. It's interesting. Let's see what comes from this. It might indeed be a good solution for those of us who aren't very good at surface mount soldering, and it's just really the placement of everything beforehand on the top, and then heat the board up so the solder that's on it already melts, and then you're done. Sounds like a good idea. It's probably one worth watching, even for amateur use.
Yeah, well, from what I can see, it looks like you like silk screen your solder onto the metal with the solder paste, which if you place a component on, will stick to the solder paste on the board, and once it's heated up to temperature and the solder melts, the component normally sort of just sometimes moves actually into the right place for you, even if you're a little bit out. But I think this, as you're right, not a thing for double-sided boards, and not a thing I would suggest that manufacturers would use. That's why I think it's probably a hobbyist thing. But looked interesting to me. Edmund, have you had a chance to have a think about this one?
My soldering skills leave a lot to be desired, to put it mildly, so I was interested when I heard about this idea. I think my only slight reservation would be applying the power afterwards and seeing whether the magic smoke came out or not, because presumably you would only need the tiniest slither of solder not to come off correctly and to cause a short circuit, to then cause catastrophic damage to the circuit board, thereby defeating the purpose of having this as an idea in the first place. But that reservation aside, yes, it does sound like a novel idea, certainly, and I'll be watching with interest, Martin.
Martin, something I just thought about, it's actually, if you think about it afterwards, so if you had one of these boards that had been created this way, and you can apply the power back to the heating element, it'd be a great way to get the components off the board. You just turn the board upside down, apply the power, and they all fall off.
Hey, actually, that's a great idea. You wouldn't have to even turn it upside down, because you don't want necessarily all the components to fall off, but just certain ones that you think have failed.
Pick them off with tweezers. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a good idea, actually. Be interesting to see where this one goes.
I think this is has potential for somebody who's working in surface mount all the time at the moment. This would mean that I could potentially manufacture or make things at home and do it. The idea of the guy suggesting you snap the heater element off the board afterwards, the input to the heating element. However, if you didn't do that, you're quite right, guys. You could reheat it. You could heat it a second time if you wanted to just move the placement of something that didn't work, or removing components. Yes, you certainly could do that.
You could put those little headers on and then jumper the heating element in and out.
You could.
Yeah.
So lots of interesting things. Whether it will take off, who knows? But clever, somebody thinking outside the box, I suggest, and maybe we'll start seeing some kits coming out which are surface mount and use this technology. So I quite like that. Moving to our next news story, amateur satellite Falcon Sat 3 is near re-entry. Now, it could have re-entered by the time we release. It is due back at any point in time, and we've been checking and we haven't heard anything about it. But this is an interesting satellite that's not just about satellite, but it had more going for it. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, let's just be clear about this. This isn't an amateur radio satellite, or it wasn't initially. Falcon Sat 3 had sort of three parts to its life. It was launched by the US Air Force Academy. out of Colorado Springs. And, to start with, it was for their training and everything else. And after a couple of years, it was then handed over from the U.S. Air Force to, from the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado to AMSAT. So initially it was being used for other training and development. But what came out of this was indeed that a lot of the students, to continue their studies, actually took out amateur radio licenses, because when it was handed over to AMSAT, the amateur radio repeater on it was started up, and they could only use that if they had a license, of course. And so we gained several new amateur radio operators through the same process. But unfortunately, like a lot of satellites, it's coming to its end of life. It's about to go crashing into the outer atmosphere. The original report said between January 16th and 21st, but I've searched around and I haven't found any reports of it actually crashing into the atmosphere and burning up as yet. But it may have done, and we just haven't had a report. But it's been around 3 or 4 years, so it was nice that it started off as a military educational, shall we say, for the Space Systems Research Centre, built in 2005 and 2006 by the cadets there, and then its last year and a half of life, it's been purely an amateur radio repeater and satellite. So good on them for doing that, and it's as it says in the text here, excellent example of how amateur radio can be integrated into the educational institution to benefit students and the amateur radio service. So yeah, it was a nice joint project, I'd say. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, as I say, interesting all round, really. So, and if AMSAT got given a free satellite to run for a couple of years, I'm sure they were extremely happy about that as well. Edmund, you got any thoughts on this one?
I'm afraid there's not really anything I can add. This isn't a satellite that I've ever received, so I don't have any personal first-hand knowledge or use of it, I'm afraid, Martin. Sorry.
Okay, well, as I say, I think, it says here over 700 cadets have obtained their amateur radio license from it. So, yeah, it's a good amateur radio feel for it. Dan, your thoughts on this one?
Well, you just stole my thunder on that. I was going to say that there was more than just a few cadets that got licensed. It was nearly 700. That's really quite a number. And I kind of wish I'd heard this story sooner, because I could have at least tried to work it just for kicks, just to say, yeah, I was one of the last, whatever, how many that was able to make a contact through FalconSat. But yeah, it's a great story, and as Ed pointed out, it is a great example of how amateur radio can be integrated into a curriculum. And I don't know, maybe more people should look into this more. Maybe I will even, and see if there's any kind of experience that I could write about, or maybe even some kind of open source stuff that we could promulgate to the rest of the amateur community, just so we don't lose that experience.
Yeah, and I know we cover a lot of space and satellite stuff here, because it's always interesting as well, and I think most amateurs have an interest in more than just the radio. But it's something that when you talk to the general public, satellites is one of those things that gets them quite excited. And they go, you've got satellites up there? You go, yep. And so, yeah, that's unfortunately, they all come to an end at some point in time. But when we've got them, let's use them. Right, moving to our next news story. Dan, you put this one in, so I'm going to make you go first on this one again. GX Unlimited, Arnie Coro?
Right, Arnie Coro, CO2KK.
Yeah, he's unfortunately a silent key, and we don't normally talk much about silent keys on this, but he was quite a big name, wasn't he?
Yeah, Arnie Coro, if you're of a certain age and you listen to shortwave radio when you were a kid, Arnie Coro was like the man, right? He had this program on Radio Havana, and I don't know, maybe you guys didn't get it so well in Europe, but he was pretty well known here in the U.S. He ran this show, DX Unlimited, and people would tune in and hear this show about shortwave listening. And he was an amateur. He would CO2KK, and I'm on this mailing list called Glow Bugs, which talks about tube equipment, valves for you guys in the UK. And he was a regular participant, so it's kind of a big loss to this group of tube radio enthusiasts too. So yeah, it's a real shame. He was well known, and he was very knowledgeable about things, and this is a loss to the amateur community.
Yeah, certainly sounds it, Dan. And you posted a picture of the gentleman as well. He's got some. Hopefully, Colin will put this on the website as well, because there's some terrific gold gear there. Mind you, it looks like a Heathkit stuff at the top, but the other transmitter, receiver, or whatever it is, well, I suggest it's a transmitter, certainly looks interesting. So, yeah, good.
I just wanted to say one more thing. And, here in the U.S., at least, Cuba has this reputation for doing whatever's necessary to keep old gear working. Mostly the articles you see here are about the old automobiles that are still running around Havana. But I'm sure it's the same with radio equipment. They mix and match and do whatever they need to do to keep the old stuff working. And I think that's what you see here with this in this picture, this old Heathkit. And this particular rig, I don't know the exact model number, but I'm sure it uses tubes. So that's just sort of the way of life in Cuba. Keep this old stuff running.
Yeah, well, as I say, these old tube radios, Dan, you told me it's cold in the States at the moment. If you had a tube radio, that would keep your shack warm, I've got to tell you.
That's for sure.
Yeah, true. Edmund, any thoughts on this one? Because I know you listen to lots of shortwave stuff, but did you ever catch this gentleman?
I tended to listen to the shortwave broadcast bands a couple of decades back, before I discovered amateur radio, but my setup was always minimal. I tended to use long wire antennas that weren't long enough, or sometimes even just the built-in telescopic rods on the various shortwave receivers I had. And I don't remember ever being able to receive Radio Havana from Cuba very often at all. And on the rare occasions I did, I don't remember hearing this program or this gentleman, but obviously it's always very sad when a fellow radio amateur passes away, and particularly when it's somebody who has carried the interest in the short waves onto a broadcast station and onto a wider platform by so doing. So may he rest in peace, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, I agree with you. And obviously our condolences go out to his family as well. Ed, looking at the gear, it's got handles on the side, but I'm damn sure you wouldn't take it on a SOTA activation. What do you think?
No, I wouldn't. But it on the point that the DX Unlimited show that this gentleman used to put on is perhaps known in the US and not in Europe is probably because I guess most of the broadcast out of Cuba would be aimed towards the US rather than anywhere else. Dan might want to come back on that, but that would make a lot of sense. That being said, the actual news item comes from a German amateur, so maybe I'm completely wrong on that assumption. A lovely picture of him there, sat in front of what looks like, as he said, a Heathkit at the top, some very old equipment in front of him, and my guess would be a Trio radio on the right of him there. So a lot of classic radios in his shack, and obviously very highly respected. And yeah, somebody that's going to be sadly missed, obviously. He's reading through the details here that are on the ICQ podcast website. He's got quite a wide range of things he's done through his life in for amateur radios for amateur radio enthusiasts in Cuba, and yeah, he'll be sorely missed. And let's just remember him in the good times, and hopefully he'll be up there looking down, trying to work some DX down from up above HI.
Yeah. Well, say my only regret is that I never heard him on the radio. From what you guys have told me, yeah, Dan, it sounded like a good thing to listen out for. Right, moving to our next news story, and Karen put this one in. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it tonight, but she put it in. And it said, grid hunters who use satellites risk losing an important resource. So there's some resources from AMSAT, a thing called Gridmaster, and other bits and pieces. But interesting to kind of work out what's going on. Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I actually can't say an awful lot about this because, I can't say. I've no idea what this software that's in use is there, the heat map or anything. I'm not really a satellite operator. So I'm hoping that either Edmund or Dan might be able to put some more meat on this one. I really don't have a lot to say about it.
Right. I think the biggest problem is that although we're all interested in satellites, we don't do a lot. And, I've only done a couple of contacts for a satellite, and I must do more. And every year I say I ought to. So, difficult. I'm going to ask Dan first. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think this really will be a big loss if they can't find another volunteer. All of these satellite operators, and I follow a lot of them on Twitter. I mean, it's the grid's the thing, right? Somebody will post, "Hey, I'm going to EM82, and anybody needs me, I'll be there at blah blah blah, whatever time it is." And I mean, that's what these satellite guys do. Is they, especially at least here in the States. So the idea is to work, all the grids, just like you might, work all states or do DXCC. And if this sort of goes away, that's going to be a big loss to that satellite community. So I do hope they find a volunteer to take over. But this almost brings up another point, which I hate to go off on a tangent here, but it seems that it's getting harder and harder to find volunteers to do these kind of things. There was a local ham fest that just said they're going to discontinue operations because they couldn't find any volunteers to take over from the fellows that have been doing it for years and years and years. And I don't know, that's just a big loss. So it's just sort of another indication that there's not enough people volunteering to do these things, which we've sort of relied on in ham radio.
Yeah, I know we didn't have a heated bit discussion, but we had a discussion, you and I, about a couple of months ago, where I was saying that there's a lot of apathy in amateur radio at the moment. Okay, it's become more noticeable since COVID, but people just don't want to do things. As things closed, nobody's picking up or coming up with some really niche good things to do anymore. So you're right, I think, Dan. There'll be a lot of these things that will slowly disappear. Now, maybe that's what the hobby needs. I don't know, but it does seem a bit of a shame when, things drop out and we lose things.
Right, exactly.
And I do think that there's a lot of apathy at the moment. Somebody else will do it and leave it. And I know I can't talk too much about it, but I know full well we've looked at a couple of other projects in the last 3 months on ICQ, could we pick up some of these bits and pieces, and decided that we couldn't. But I don't think other people are looking at things. That's the worry. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Well, keeping that theme going, one of the reasons or excuses, if you want to see it that way, that I have for not doing or starting to do certain things is that I'm worried that if the time came when I needed to stop for whatever reason, I wouldn't then have anybody else to pass it on to. So I'd rather not start in the first place. But leaving that aside and going back to satellites, utterly shamefully, I've had an elk log periodic antenna for several years now, and I have used it many, many times for terrestrial communications of VHF and UHF. I am still yet to have my first successful QSO on a satellite, and that includes even on the so-called FM Easy Sats. So with that as an introduction, I'm afraid I don't have any knowledge at all about this particular news story there, Martin. Oh, one other thing I will just mention, again, going off at a tangent, please, please, please do not transmit on any band in sections that are reserved for satellites. On 2 meters, the downlink from the International Space Station on 145.8 worldwide, I've seen on social media reports of people having QSOs, simplex QSOs on the ground, slap bang on that frequency, hopefully not deliberately or maliciously, and hopefully not when the ISS has been directly overhead. On 10 meters in the satellite section there from 29.3 to 29.5. Okay, I know that is very, very rarely used these days, but even so, earlier this afternoon I heard an FM simplex QSO going on a frequency just above 29.3, so that potentially could have caused QRM. And also we had the FalconSat story earlier. The downlink frequency of that satellite is roughly 435.1. That same frequency is the uplink for a different satellite, JO97, I think it is, which then has a downlink around 145.88, I think. And it's not an FM satellite, that one, JO97. It's an inverting linear transponder SSB satellite. But a tweet appeared from Peter, 2 Mike 0 Sierra Quebec Lima, who's very, very active on satellites in general. And it was actually a tweet from earlier today. And it says words to the effect of somebody somewhere in Europe, it looks like they're having a simplex QSO on that frequency in FM because JO97 is picking it up and retransmitting it in the whole footprint of the satellite, and by extension also making the satellite completely unusable for SSB contacts at the same time, I guess. So the short version is, if you must have FM simplex QSOs, nothing wrong with that, obviously. Please, please, please do not do it on frequencies that are designed to be used by satellites. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all, mate. No problems at all. And good thing. Right, moving to our last news story, and I'm conscious you haven't had to go first, Edmund, so I'll bring you straight back in again. But there's a natural phenomenon which affects radio waves and helps scientists, and this is talking about radio signals that have been picked up by a radio telescope that looks like they've been travelling 8.8 billion years. What do you think, Edmund?
This is mind-blowing. I've no idea how they managed to pick these signals up throughout all the other QRM that is out there. But also the antennas that they're using must have an enormous amount of gain. I assume they're using lots of different antennas stacked and bayed together, or a network of dishes. But if the antenna has a huge amount of gain, it also presumably has a very narrow bore sight if it's a dish. So this is something way above my head, but isn't it wonderful what they can do with modern technology, Martin? Perhaps we could put a dish up in your back garden or something. How about that?
Yeah, one would like to, Edmund, but we are technically supposed to be moving soon, so probably not something Mrs. B would be very happy to see, even if I wasn't moving, but less likely when I'm moving. So, yeah, you're talking about there is this phenomenon where it can increase the signal, but I'll leave it for you others to say about it. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm with Ed here. This is just mind-blowing. I mean, it's just amazing. But I want to just say something about this. So what is the best hobby for a kid to get into if he wants to get into radio astronomy as a profession? Well, amateur radio. And so that, people keep talking about, we're becoming irrelevant and blah, blah, blah. But seriously, if you're a kid now and you're happen to be listening to this program, which I don't know how many kids we have listening to the program, you want to get into ham radio because you're going to learn all kinds of things that will be important if you want to do radio astronomy later in your life. And that, to me, I think that this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, feature of ham radio or whatever, is almost more important these days than any kind of emergency communications we provide. This kind of thing is the reason amateur radio should exist, is to be able to train future radio astronomers in the RF arts, and so that they can make incredible discoveries like that.
Yeah, well, as I say, talking to the general public, just very quickly, I was at the hospital maintenance department the other day, booking in, and a gentleman came across to talk to us, one of the maintenance guys, and he's into flying drones, and he wanted to talk radio to us because, hey, I found some guys that understand a bit about radio and they can tell me bits and pieces. So, he's a potential candidate as well to get into our hobby, I would suggest, and he's being worked on, put it that way. Okay, Ed, last words on this one?
Yeah, just comment that it's 21 centimetres, isn't too far away from the amateur 23 centimetre band. But this is the signal that has been received from another universe, not just another galaxy, is it? Most distant galaxy yet. 8.8 billion years ago. Good grief. It's just hard to understand. But it was received by the giant meter wave radio telescope in India. So the gain of that thing and the accuracy of it must be absolutely fantastic. And, that's it's always good to know these things. But then again, you also say, well, hey, we got a faint radio signal from a long way away, and if there ever was a person there, they'll be well dead several billion years ago. While it's interesting, it's not actually going to do anybody any good, I don't think, really, because it's all happened. But, it's interesting when people usually apparently it was effectively bounced off another galaxy on the way in, so to speak, as gravitational lensing. So it's all good stuff, and it's all radio. And as Martin was saying, if somebody gets into amateur radio hobby, if they're looking to get into this kind of radio telescope things, it'll give them a good grounding as a child to get into this and understand some of this. And amazing things, but from a far, far away galaxy. Yeah, what's this? When the universe was 4.9 billion years old. Amazing, but not really anything we individually can do an awful lot about. But maybe some of the people we can train, or people that come through our hobby and then train to be top flight scientists, might be able to do something about this in the future. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, all good things. And what I will say is, both you and Dan mentioned getting a youngster or a child into the hobby. Great, I agree with that. But equally, there are some of us who are a bit older than that are still young at heart. And it could be something interesting that somebody listening to this may not even have an amateur radio license, but might spur them to get it, to have a go at this. And you're never too late to start. Knowledge is a wonderful thing, and it's something that they can't take off you. You know, I find it great that I'm able to apply the knowledge I have within amateur radio to do a lot of other things that other people stand and look at you and go, how did you know that? Well, it generates a technical inquiring mind, and you read and you pick up all these things. So I think this is a good one to finish on, and I'm pleased with Karen put this one in for us. So that concludes our news stories. Let's find out what the guy's been up to. I'm going to start with Dan. Dan, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I was thinking about this before the show, trying to think of what I would say. And honestly, I don't have a lot of new stuff, but I continue to work my 3 QSOs a day, and I've been working what's called the slow speed test here. It happens on Sunday night, and it's a way to encourage slow speed CW operators to get on the air and work contests. That's always fun. And I guess one new thing is I don't have it yet, but I purchased through eHam, or QRZ.com, so I'm hoping it's a good purchase. I purchased an IC7610, so I'm waiting on delivery of that to put that on the air. So that's about it. Well, I guess also I should say I'm trying to get started on the general class study guide. The question pool for the general class test here is going to be changing on July 1st, and I need to get working on the study guide for that. So that's that.
Yeah, well, the study guide, Dan, I'm sure you'll make an exceptionally good job of it like you have done in the past. And my only regret was that I didn't know you until after I'd done my three exams. But I have read a couple of your books, and they are very, very interesting. So, that's a good one. Edmund, what have you been up to?
The only thing of any great note that I've done since last time is that I took part in the 145 Alive event on the 14th of January, and that is an activity afternoon. It's not a contest, it's an activity afternoon designed to promote and encourage FM simplex activity on 2 meters. Part of it is encouraging new licensees on the air, but it's an event that's open to absolutely everybody. And Tim, Golf 5 Tango Mike, who lives just a few miles down the road from where I live, he organised it, and he was located at Kithurst Hill near Arundel in West Sussex, which is actually a HEMA, Humps Excluding Marilyn's Award location. Okay, he didn't qualify for HEMA because he was sitting in his car, but I think his reason for choosing that venue is that up until very recently, the car park, which is very popular for, radio enthusiasts, but also people who want to go walking along the South Downs, that car park was threatened with closure for whatever the reason was. The good news is that Horsham District Council have now stepped in and have said that they are taking over responsibility for it. and the car park will remain open. Don't know if they'll introduce pay and display charges at some point in the future, but that news about the car park staying open hadn't broken at the time the 145 Alive took place, so I think Tim might have gone up there thinking it was going to be one of his last opportunities to do radio from that location. And it's about 210 metres above sea level. And when I spoke to him afterwards, he reckoned that he had got 60 stations in his log, which is pretty good going. The conditions were flat, so none of us were benefiting from tropospheric ducting or anything like that. And it was a nice mixture of call signs and vintages. He had everything from recently licensed Mike 7 stations all the way through to Golf 3 stations that were licensed in the 1960s and everything in between. So, very successful event. From my point of view, it was interesting though, because I ended up in a different location to the one that I was planning. We've had an awful lot of rain so far in 2023 in this part of the world, and I was worried that the road up to my original intended location might be flooded, or if I got up there, my car might sink into the mud and I'd have to be towed out. So at the last minute, I went to a different venue. I went to Truley Hill near Shoreham rather than Chantry Post. Now, Truley Hill has got a couple of very large masts on the top of it that broadcast DAB digital radio. And I think they also transmit some PMR services at VHF. So I thought I'd better take a reasonably chunky radio with me. So I took along my Kenwood TM-V71, which I've had for well over a decade now and that I don't use very often. But it's a full duplex radio, I think. So my logic was, if there is a bit of RF knocking about up there, it's sturdy enough with a strong enough front end to be able to cope with it. And to begin with, I thought that was the case because I could hear all these different stations calling in, and all of them were readability 5, but nobody seemed to be more than S6 on the signal strength meter. And to begin with, I just thought, well, that's because the people I'm hearing are a certain distance away from me, so that is the correct report for them. Nobody's stronger than S6, until somebody else who was also on Truley Hill but further up the road than I was called in, and when he transmitted, he was only S6 as well. And I thought, this can't be right, because it wouldn't matter if he was running 1 milliwatt. He's just up the road. He should be stronger than S6. And that was when I suddenly realised that I was suffering from descents far more than I thought I was. By chance, I ordered a Sotabeam's 2-metre bandpass filter that had arrived in the nick of time, I think about 2 days before the event. And I also had a handheld radio with me, so I stuck the 2-metre filter on that. And this chap who was on the same hill as me suddenly went from S6 to S9 plus 60, far more in keeping with what I expected. So the short version of all of this and the moral of the story is that even if you don't realise in a particular location that you are being desensed by nearby strong transmissions, it's worth getting one of these filters or something similar and putting it on your radio just to see if it makes a difference. And in my case, it made one heck of a difference. Drawback is, of course, I was then only transmitting at handheld power, and with the Sotabeam's filter, the maximum you can do is 5 watts for 90 seconds. Otherwise, the thing overheats and melts, presumably. whereas the Kenwood TMV71 could run 50 watts at full power. So what I lost in transmission power, I made up for in my ability to hear stations. So lesson learned for next time, and it's just something to be mindful of, because I had visions of, if I was going to get interference from these nearby masts, it would be really obvious. It would wipe absolutely everything out. I would just hear sort of weird screeching noises across the entire 2 meter band. I didn't realise that it could actually be a lot more subtle than that. So if anybody is going somewhere portable out and about, doing SOTA or HEMA or even parks on the air, if the park is many, many metres above sea level, it's worth thinking about it and maybe trying a filter on your handheld, because your reception could be being spoilt and desensed by nearby strong transmissions out of band, and you might not even realise at all that it's happening. Herein endeth the lesson. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. And I suppose us amateurs are our own worst enemy, because when we buy radios now, we've pretty much got the manufacturers to give us a wide open front end. And a lot of even the handy talkies receive right down from the medium wave right the way up to UHF. So there isn't all that much filtering on the front end of a lot of modern radios these days, which is a bit of a pain. Ed, what have you been up to?
Not a lot. For a change, it's Edmund's been doing lots of things and covering lots of points there. In my case, very little. The whole of the last week we've been under snow here, so we're going to be a few more days of that. I'm hoping to get out next Sunday, and I will be using a special event call sign, DL20SOTA, for 20 years of SOTA in Germany, and got a sked with a special event station in Australia that is celebrating 10 years of SOTA in one of their states down there in the ACT. So fingers crossed for that, and fingers crossed that the temperatures rise a little bit before then. But apart from that, it's all been inside work mainly, and working on some other antenna projects, but nothing far enough that I could actually get outside and test it because of the weather. So not so much this time round, Martin. So back to you.
Yeah, well, we can't always do mega amounts of things, and last few weeks I haven't been as busy as I'd like to be. But it does sound like you've been having fun anyway, Ed. So, what have I been up to? Well, I'm the owner of two. I had one bought for me for a Christmas present, and I got given one a little while ago. FunCube Dongle Pro Pluses, the little dongle that you plug in this USB port, and it's a software-defined radio. Do you think I could get the damn things to work? I have had my original one working many times. I just can't get it to work at the moment. Looks like the current software out there isn't supporting it. So I'm tearing my hair out a little bit, but it's not desperate. This is one of those things where I do of an evening and it tries to keep me awake while I've been playing with them. But I'll get there. It's not urgent. I don't need to fix it tomorrow, but it's something on my back burner that I'm doing in between other things. Have been playing with some small circuits on breadboards. I bought myself a little electronic breadboard with some resistors, capacitors, and some transistors, because every now and again when I'm reading a book, suddenly there's a little circuit and you think, I wouldn't mind trying. Oh, that looks interesting. So the idea is that I can knock it up quick on a breadboard, have a play, put the scope on it, have a look and go, yeah, I understand more about that, or that's interesting. I'll make one of those later. So that's what I've been playing with. That's quite fun. Have been on the talk group, not as often as I'd like because I've been busy on other things, but I have been on there and spoken to quite a few people, which is quite nice. I did do a presentation. It's up on the internet under Cycle 25. You have to look in their live section. But I did a presentation regarding the ICQ Digital Voice Project, and that's up on the YouTube if anybody wants to go and find it. As well as that, a gentleman called Phil and myself from Sutton and Sheen Club managed to reinstall GB3 XP in South London with the current new new repeater, and that is now back on in Fusion and Analog. So the Fusion section is now back on. And for the first 3 days, I thought the poor repeater was going to go in a meltdown, the amount of traffic went through it. But it's still fairly active, so that's quite nice. In fact, I went on that afternoon we put it in. I worked 6 people, one after another. And one was a gentleman in Canada. And I'm sorry, mate, I've forgotten your name. I know you're a listener. I apologise profusely. But we had a chat as well. So Fusion was up and working good. Done a fair amount of mobile operations, usually from the car when I'm out and about in it. Then last but not least, in a couple of weeks' time, or on the 5th of February, Edmund, Carol and I, and maybe some of the other presenters, I'm not 100% sure yet, will be at the Canvey Island rally in Essex. So there's a rally there. We'd look forward to seeing you. We're there as a special interest group and love to talk to you as you come along. Look forward to seeing as many of you can make it because I think it'll be a bit of fun. And just be aware, Mrs. B does do wind-ups. She convinced a lot of people that because she had one of our reject jackets, which is it's technically a reject jacket with white writing on, she told everybody at the last rally that she was the boss because her jacket had different colour writing on. So just be aware, she is a wind-up merchant. But we're certainly looking forward to Canvey Island Rally. So that's what I've been up to. So not a lot else. All I can do now is thank the guys for turning up and helping me today. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, no need to thank me. I should thank you. Thanks a lot, Martin.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, we enjoy it to Dan, so that's the good thing about this. I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
As always, you're very welcome, Martin, and till the next one, 73.
Yeah, and there will be a next one, no doubt about that. And last but not least, Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG.
Thank you for having me, Martin.
Yeah, it's been great as well, mate. No problems at all. Okay, guys, I'll say 73s and we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. 73, guys.
73.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BRY. The team at the ICQ podcast would like to pass on its congratulations to the Mississippi Science and Technology Amateur Radio Club, current call sign Whiskey Zero Echo Echo Echo. It's located at the Missouri University of Science and Technology, and it's gearing up to celebrate its 100th year, its centenary there. Now, they think that as the FCC wasn't around in 1923, that the original club used the call sign Whiskey 9 Delta Uniform Mike. They were then assigned as well for a period of time Whiskey November Echo 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 before settling on the call sign of Whiskey Zero Echo Echo Echo. So currently the club has 20 active members and over 300 alumni that regularly visit to help support the club's activities. So it's many congratulations to the guys there at Missouri, for achieving a fantastic milestone. The Orlando HamCation event is fast approaching, and the guys there are suggesting that everybody downloads their new mobile phone app to help it really easy for you to navigate your way through all the wonderful attraction attendees, talks, etc. That you can see there at the show. As always, optimized for both Apple or Android phones, depending on which one is your preference. You can also access it through the web browser as well to make sure the fact it's fully available to you. So I say if you're visiting Orlando for HamCation, and I'm very jealous if you are, on the 10th and 12th of February, as I say, certainly look at the group's app to get the most from the show. And we finish off with news in the UK that the RSGB have announced that Ofcom has approved the use of the letter R as a coronation prefix for all amateur radio users and stations, etc. that will be able to use throughout the whole of May and June to celebrate the coronation of King Charles III. So say look out in May for those special call signs that will be available for you to use to celebrate that special event. Right, well, now we head over to our features episode. This is a feature on workshop experiments. As always, hopefully something for you to enjoy, whet your appetite and get you interested.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode I wanted to talk about something that I mentioned in the What Have I Been Doing section of this podcast. Now, I've been experimenting in the workshop here, looking at little circuits, and I mentioned doing things on breadboards. But then I became aware that our hobby is about experimentation and learning as much as communicating with people around the world. And not all hams have an electronics background. So often they may very well feel excluded from some of the things we talk about. So I thought it'd be nice just to give them a bit of a clue of what I've been up to, and maybe encourage a few of you to do a very, very similar thing. Now, this is purely down to yourself, but it could be a good thing. As I say, not all hams have an electronics background, and you shouldn't be ashamed if you don't. We can't all be the same. Often when you read these textbooks, sometimes they're very bland. You know, it says it does this, and we always believe it. But what happens if it doesn't? What happens when you are told about an amplifier, an audio amplifier, and said, yeah, this audio amplifier has distortion, or you can have distortion if you do this, that, and the other. So sometimes it's just nice to build a small little circuit and have a look at it and actually play with it. Force it into distortion. And in many ways, try and break it. Many years ago, when I was a TV engineer back in the 1970s, they used to say when I got a new television into the workshop, a brand new model into the workshop, I was the first person to take the back off it and have a good look inside on one thing and another. And often, back then, you could almost ring the components on the circuits that were going to be problematical based on the fact that most of the circuits were very, very similar, and manufacturers run with substandard components or values that weren't high enough wattage to work for long periods of time without needing repair. So self-experimentation, great. And, when I say try and break it, I don't mean physically damage it, but see what happens when you change some component values. Sometimes not a lot happens, but it's interesting just to have a little play. The other thing is, when I started doing this, I just wanted to experiment with some of these little circuits that are in some of the books I've got. As I'm reading, I thought, it wouldn't be nice just to try that out, or just try this out. Now, this doesn't have to cost you a fortune, and I'll come on to it as we go through. Now, the number one thing I'm going to say here, you are doing this at your own risk. I am not prepared to buy you a new piece of test equipment or components if you wreck them. However, this shouldn't be an expensive part of the hobby if done correctly. I would suggest that even if you're an experienced person, working on low voltages is quite safe. So as long as we work on voltages, say up to 12 volts or up to 15 volts, that's probably okay, and you're not going to get an electric shock off that, unless you've probably cut your fingers or whatever. Now, just because it's low voltage doesn't mean to say it's totally safe. Yeah, with low voltage, you can get high currents at times. For argument's sake, the little PP3 9-volt batteries, if you were to put a short circuit across those with a bit of wire wool, the wire wool melts. It glows red hot and melts. Or if you've got keys in your pocket, I've talked about this before, you will drop your trousers very quickly when those keys start glowing red hot. So be aware that you could have high currents, and with high currents you're going to let out the magic smoke. So just be aware of that. You need to try and keep that magic smoke within inside the device. And other things like electrolytic capacitors, make sure you get them around the right way because they do go bang. There was before I had the kitchen ceiling replaced, there was a hole in the kitchen ceiling where an electrolytic went up and punched its whole way through a plasterboard. Fortunately, my head was out of the way at the time it exploded. And I've also seen LEDs pop and blow the top off them. Now, this is if you don't put a current limiter on it, the resistor in series with the LED. So don't bend your head over the device you're working on when you first start powering it up. You know, have a good look around, make sure it works properly before you investigate too closely. Just as a little safety one there. Now, how are you going to build this stuff? Well, there's two options. You can either build it on a printed circuit board and, just keep it. And there's various ways of doing this. There's the little island pads you can stick to a printed circuit board. There's island cutters. You can cut little islands on printed circuit board and as tabs and solder components between them. There's also strip board. I call it strip board. In the UK, we'd know it as variable, which is probably a manufacturer's name. And these will either have copper strips either side and holes to push the components through, or sometimes they don't have copper strips, and before you bend the component leads over when you push them through the board, and you use the component lead as the current carrier. Now, they are perfectly good ways of making things and experimenting, but, and this is the but, this is a more expensive option in the long term because you won't be able to easily recover components for another project. So kind of the one you should be thinking about is these electronic breadboards. Now the electronic breadboards, various types, they also have you can get powered ones, which have got built-in power supplies, and they're pretty expensive. So for start off, I wouldn't suggest that. But one of these ones that's 6 or 7 inches long by about 3 inches wide, perfectly acceptable for start-off circuits you're going to make. And if you buy more, they just clip together and you can use them for all sorts of things. Now they have strips. Down the two edges, you'll find a long strip, and you'll find that you can use those for power buses. And then the component strips in the middle, the strip flows top to bottom. So the connections are top to bottom in the middle strip, and along the top and bottom it's left to right. So if you're unsure, just look up basically how these boards are made. And with a couple of little devices plugged in and a multimeter, you can quickly buzz out and convince yourself in your own mind which way these strips go. Now, components. Well, you need a certain amount of components to test. This isn't expensive. I bought a pack of resistors. You can buy them from your favourite auction site. You buy a pack of resistors, 20 of each value for test purposes. I bought some ceramic capacitors, various values. I bought some electrolytic capacitors, various values. And some general purpose transistors. Now, I bought some 2N series. I can't exactly remember the number off the top of my head now, but they're not important. You're only experimenting. But you want NPN and PNP transistors, at least a few of each. Don't just buy one of each, because if you do experiment and pop one of them and blow it to kingdom come, then at least you can carry on once you've worked out why you blew it up, put another transistor in and carry on your experimenting. They're not that expensive. And a few LEDs. Now, LEDs are useful because with a series limiting resistor, you can see if something lights up or not lighting up. Certainly if you're testing switch circuits or whatever, things like that. It's easier than putting a multimeter on all the time and watching it to jump up and down. Although there's nothing wrong with doing it with a multimeter. It's just nice to see the thing glow occasionally. Test equipment. Now you can make this as expensive or as cheap as you want. In fairness, you need a power supply. Well, as I said, you only need a power supply for low voltage. So, one or two things you could do. You can either cannibalize an old wall wart, one of these blocks that plug in the wall. Might be a 5-volt one for a USB device or a 12-volt one. You may even have an old CB power supply, 3-amp CB power supply sitting around. Nothing wrong with those. They perfectly work fine. Or you can pick something up at a rally or at HamFest quite cheaply. You only really need 1 voltage most of the time, although variable voltage power supplies would be useful going forward and doing this more seriously. You need a multimeter because you will be taking voltage measurements, and as most amateurs, you should have a voltmeter now anyway. Next thing I'd suggest you get is an oscilloscope. And before you start to think, hang on, Martin's spending £300, £400, £500 or $500 of my money. No, there are loads of oscilloscopes that get almost thrown away at hamfests and rallies because people don't want them anymore. The old analog ones, they work perfectly okay. They might not be fully calibrated, and they may only have a bandwidth for, say, 10 or 20 megahertz. But you're experimenting. If you're playing with audio, you don't need to go up to 20 megahertz anyway. So, a cheap oscilloscope is worth having because at least you can see what's going on. And when you're playing with transistors and audio, when you change the bias, you can actually see by changing the bias, a transistor starts to go into distortion. And it's not a clean output. So, rather than just read if this happens in a book, you can actually see it. And if you had a variable resistor there, you could make it go in and out of oscillation and check and do all these measurements just to clear things in your own mind. Now, signal generator would be great. It doesn't have to be really expensive. I mean, you can make them with the 2 or 3 components. There's lots of circuits out there. You can make yourself up a little signal injector. Or keep your eye open when you go round the HamFest or rally in the UK. Often RF signal generators come up at under £20 or $20, and AF generators probably even less. So it's an option. You don't have to struggle with expensive equipment. The last thing I say is if you're going to have a go at this, you need 2 other things: time and have fun. Because it's interesting. Okay, you're not picking up a mic and you're not talking to Fred down the road or in the next country, but you are having a bit of fun, re-educating yourself, confirming some of the things you actually knew. And in fairness, I remember many, many, many moons ago when I was a radio TV engineer and I moved into the computers, they gave me a Tektronix 465 100 meg scope. Once I got that, I still had televisions kicking around, and I went and looked at some of the signals on a television. You know, the IF signal on a television at 39 megs, which I could never have looked at before. So it's interesting you go and actually see what's in the textbooks and make sure they're right, because sometimes they ain't right. Anyway, I hope this is of interest. For those who haven't done electronics, be safe, work on low voltages, be careful. High currents will cause components to get very hot, maybe even pop the lids off them or produce smoke. But you're not spending a lot of money, so as long as you're sensible and careful, you should be perfectly safe. I hope this was of interest.
The ICQ podcast, advert free since 2008.
Well, everybody, I really hope there you got something there from our workshop experiments feature this episode. And as always, it's a great opportunity to have a think about things that you might have forgotten, or I say creeping away there in the dark parts of our mind, or might even whet your appetite for something new to try out. And hopefully, I say that gives you the opportunity from there. Well, we're coming up to the first opportunity for the Orange Shirt Brigade to be out and about. I think it's next weekend. Am I right in thinking it's the Canvey Island rally for some of the London, UK-based presenters, Dad?
Yeah, certainly is, Colin, and we thoroughly look forward to doing that one. Tony emailed me and invited us. We're really pleased to do it, and we did it a couple of years ago, just before COVID. We'll be there, orange shirts in the hall, jackets on outside, by the way. But no, it's all indoors. It's an interesting rally, really enjoyable, and a chance not only for you guys, but for us as well, to meet up with colleagues, friends, and people we haven't seen for a long time. So, don't be shy. Come along, and I will probably be demonstrating on the ICQ table as well our digital talk group, so you can see it in action, which I know full well works. I know for definite that your mum, Mrs. B, and myself and Edmund are definitely going, and I think a couple of others might as well join us while we're there. So should be a good one, Colin. I thoroughly enjoyed it last time.
Yeah, fantastic. And as I say, take that opportunity to catch up with the guys out there. And if Mrs. B is there, of course, an opportunity to buy her a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit. So I send you her way there, no problems at all. Well, as I say, at the top of the show, we had a very kind donor, Martin Malley, Whiskey Zero Zulu Kilo, who, along with his donation, along with our monthly subscription donors, help us pay our way. And it's great for Martin to show his value for everything he gets from the show. We ask you to consider helping us out by doing a very simple thing. Think of the enjoyment and the value and the ideas you got from our show today. Go along to icqpodcast.com/donate. Turn that into a monetary value and either take one of the options we've got there for you, or say choose one yourself and send it our way. And say it'd be great say for your continued support of everything we do. So thanks a lot, Martin, and all the monthly and annual subscription donors. Now, talking about thank you, we'd like to thank Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Ed, DD5 Lima Puffer, for joining Martin out on the News Roundtable. As I say, so hopefully they've generated you some lovely thoughts and ideas from you from there. Right, well, that just about wraps up everything from our end for this episode. And now, as mentioned there, getting Mrs. B a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit is our staple for looking after and for kindly letting you have the time to do your part for the podcast from your side. So I'm going to let you head off and arrange such a treat for Mrs. B.
Yeah, certainly will, Colin. A cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit, I think, is the order of the day now. So that's a good one. No problems at all. Well, I'll leave you in peace, mate. and say 73 to our listeners, and off we go again.
Exactly. 73 is all. Catch you on the fortnight time.